Hello everyone, today we will go together to the William Mullins-Johnson case. This is one of the most horrifying cases of wrongful conviction, when the crime did not actually happen. The bureaucracy in the court system, the expert has brought the William family a real nightmare. Nothing can compensate for the damage that this family has suffered for 12 years. Welcome to Detective TV. In 1993, William Mullins-Johnson was prosecuted for the rape and murder of his niece Valin Johnson. William Mullins-Johnson spent 12 years in prison, a false indictment for murder that caused the death of his 4-year-old niece, Valin. Then 12 years later, people proved his innocence. But the errors in the mistaken indictment not only affected William Mullins-Johnson, but also seriously affected his entire family. Despite being freed and receiving an official apology from those responsible and the justice system, the true cost of that mistake is unknown and unknowable, which William Mullins-Johnson and his family are still bearing. Overwhelming feelings of hatred, indignation, and guilt. The victims of the mistake are still suffering the consequences of a miscarriage of justice. It was the worst day ever for the entire family. A child passed away quietly in her sleep. The next morning, her mother found her dead and her beloved uncle destroyed. William Mullins-Johnson recalled in tears, "The man sobbing," she cried, "screamed and told me that Valin was dead. Not just death but murder," according to the police investigation, who quickly charged the uncle. "She angrily informed me that they had evidence that I had killed her, and to all the accusations I replied, 'I didn't do it. I didn't know about it and it wasn't me. It wasn't me,'" he recalled. Life was far from easy for Laureen Hill and her 3 sons. Born in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, she worked hard every day at a local fruit and vegetable market in the coldest days of the Canadian cold from dawn to dusk before returning home to care for her children. Of the 4 boys, William Mullins-Johnson, also known as Bill or Billy, was the most different, quite different from the other brothers in the family. Bill was very tall, only 6 feet tall at the age of 12, and people always expected him to act like an adult while Billy was still a child. Bill's mother explained that Billy was somewhat deaf and blind due to the effects of encephalitis when he was only 3.5 years old, so he did not develop normally like other children. That is why many relatives and close friends often did not judge him fairly. To protect himself, Bill only shared everything with his older brother Paul, also known as Paulie. He was always withdrawn, and according to his mother, Paul was a very quiet person, always keeping everything to himself. They became closer and lived quietly together. At the age of 10, Bill was imprisoned for 15 months for theft, and he tried to get back to life. After being released from prison, it was Paulie who came to take Bill to live with him, in a small house with his wife and their 3 daughters. Bill's sister-in-law, Kim LaRiviere, recalls, "We got along very well, we trusted Billy. All 3 of our grandchildren loved their cousin. The children loved being with Billy and Valin was always very close to Bill. But the smiles did not last forever in Paul's family. Bill used stimulants and drugs, so there were always arguments that made their relationship worse, and even his mother noticed something was wrong. Paul was always wary of Bill and tried to protect the children. And that was how Paul acted on the fateful afternoon of Saturday, June 1993. He took the children to the basketball court, while Bill stayed home to wait for Paul to come home for dinner so they could continue playing their favorite game. That Saturday evening, everything went as usual as the family sat around the television, except for one thing that was unusual. Valin was suffering from a slight fever and seemed quite tired. She kept coughing. An hour later, Bill carefully carried his 3-year-old niece upstairs to rest, and that was the last time Bill saw his niece. "She kissed me and hugged me like always. She said she loved me and I said I loved her. She fell asleep, leaving John and I to go downstairs. Then the next morning, her mother found her dead and nothing could be the same again. I saw her face turn purple and she didn't seem to be playing. The vomit was all over her face." Mullins-Johnson ran up to his 4-year-old niece's bedroom. "That's where I found her lying in the room on the bed," Mullins-Johnson sobbed. He said he watched in horror as his brother, Paul Johnson, rolled Valin's lifeless body over. They tried to revive her, but it was too late. She was dead. "What the hell is going on here? That's all that went through my head," Mullins-Johnson recalled. The police arrived quickly and immediately began taking statements. Mullins-Johnson explained that he lived with Valin and her entire family and had been babysitting the child the night before. He had no idea that he would soon become the prime suspect in Valin's death. Mother Bill and many others there had assumed that the girl had died of a serious illness. That was a reasonable assumption, but that afternoon, Dr. Babendra Razaya conducted an autopsy to determine why and when Valin had died. Because, according to him, the death was suspicious, not natural. The police report said death was due to asphyxiation. There had been force applied to the chest area, and very suspicious, not natural. There were bruises on her thighs and vagina. They believed that these were signs of rape. And the investigating police officer, who left Paul's house and immediately returned. Mrs. Hill recalled the police arrived again with 2 detectives. They told everyone in the house to get out. And only Polly, Billy, and Kim remained in the house, and they locked those 3 in while the others went away. At the hospital, the pathologist Razaya made a clear assumption that the girl had been raped, and he consulted 2 other doctors who specialized in sexual abuse. Over the phone, they said that it was not just abuse but also multiple rapes. Another doctor, who examined the girl's body but had no experience in pathology, went further and said that she had been murdered. 5 hours later, Dr. Razaya concluded that, according to the police, Valin had suffered from a very strong compression to the chest area, and when asked when it had happened, Dr. Razaya estimated it was between 8 and 10 p.m. the night before, around the time Billy had put her to bed alone. An hour later, 12 hours after Valin was found dead, Bill was arrested. Mullins-Johnson was charged with rape and first-degree murder. And what the police wanted was a confession. Bill recalled, "All the police officers came up to me, held me tight and said that the thing to do now was to confess. And all I could say was, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. That wasn't me. Then someone said they had semen that I left on Valin's body. But when I asked them, they couldn't prove it. And I couldn't prove my innocence either." The Johnson family was in shock as Valin's beloved Uncle Billy was charged with sexually abusing and killing her. While the grieving mother attended a family meeting and Polly, who was also a police officer, discussed with the other members, and I could see him, telling everyone in the family to talk to their children and tell them what Billy had done to them. For Laureen, there was one more thing that bothered her. Valin was her grandson, but Billy was the son she had always tried to protect and love. She wanted to believe he was innocent, but she still needed to go to the prison to see her son to make sure he had absolutely not done such a terrible thing. The other members of the family did not bother to ask. On the day Valin was buried, Billy received a phone call from his grandparents. I expected to hear a lot from them. I expected to have a family leader judge me for what I did or didn't do. But from that day on, I knew the whole family was wary of me and shunned me. When the trial began in the fall of 1994, not much had changed. Bill's mother sat quietly in a corner of the courtroom with no one else around. There was no clear scientific evidence linking Bill to Valin's death. And in the end, with only a hint of doubt, the jury concluded that Valin had been murdered, with Bill as the prime suspect who put her to bed, sexually abused her, and then killed her. And so did the others who lived in the house. Ultimately, the evidence was presented as many people thought Valin had been sexually abused multiple times. As he sat in the detention center awaiting trial, a thought tormented Bill's mind. When he heard the forensic conclusion, he knew better than anyone that he had not done it. So who was it? If it wasn't him, it had to be another man in that house, the girl's father, and also Bill's closest brother, Paul. He said, I killed her, but I didn't do it, so I think it's very possible that he did it all. It's very possible. Everyone thinks I sexually abused her and then killed her. I didn't do it, so what about Polly? As for the judge, when they still hadn't found solid evidence to convict Bill, they turned to another suspect, Polly, the girl's father. Paul also realized that, in the eyes of everyone, he was now a suspect. In fact, there wasn't much more evidence to show that Paul was involved in Valin's death. So then, the court went back to the original assumptions. The films and photos of the body showed fairly accurate predictions with bruises around the neck and chest. Then other experts were called in, among them Dr. Charles Smith. At that time, Dr. Charles Smith was considered the top forensic doctor in the country. a character that was a nightmare for defense attorneys. It was very difficult to defeat his forensic analysis. Dr. Smith was very confident and talented. Rarely anyone could defeat him. This man always handled the image analysis skillfully, according to the comments of those who had the opportunity to work with him. At the trial, Dr. Smith not only followed the previous autopsy report, but also went further with the conclusion that the girl was raped and died 1 minute later. And the rape and murder charges were always classified as first-degree murder. Immediately after being convicted, the prisoner would be sentenced to life in prison. The judges, and specifically the members of the jury, were convinced by the arguments of these experts. That conclusion left them with no other choice because in that short 1-minute period, only Bill was with the girl. And they couldn't think of anything else to change their decision. In the end, it took the jury about an hour and a half to come up with a final verdict that found the man guilty and shattered his family. Boissonneau, a relative of Bill's who attended the trial from beginning to end, said, "I knew him to be a gentle boy, and it was hard to accept the fact that he killed someone. None of us, his relatives, had the warmest, closest relationship with him. But on the other hand, the police and the media said Valin died of rape and murder. We really didn't know what to think at that time. It was really the hardest thing for our whole family." Immediately after his arrest, Mullins-Johnson was placed in isolation in a cell at the Sault Ste. Marie jail, where the 6.5-foot-tall, 260-pound giant was unable to eat or drink anything. Of the entire Johnson family, only Bill's mother, Laureen Hill, visited. Because the loyalty she paid was too high a price. She was isolated. Family members, including her other sons and their families, could not understand Bill's innocence. And Paul's wife became resentful and showed no desire to maintain a relationship with her. The 2 remaining granddaughters had lost their sisters, and now their grandmother as well. "I always believed Billy. Of course my family and friends avoided me because they thought I was only talking about him. I couldn't stop talking about him," she said, tears streaming down her face. "For years, we just cried. Every time I spoke to Bill on the phone, every time I visited him in prison, one of the hardest things for me was to walk into the prison and then walk out and leave him there alone. I have prayed for him every night for the past 12 years. For Bill, the release was the hardest thing that could happen." On May 26, 1998, the Supreme Court of Canada rejected his appeal. Bill's only hope was the help of the association in defense of the wrongly convicted. After nearly 2 years of bureaucratic incompetence, the head of the Ontario Coroner's Office ordered a search of Dr. Smith's room at the Toronto Children's Hospital for missing medical records, and the remaining autopsy reports were found on the doctor's desk. And from then on, the story changed. After reviewing the original autopsy report with medical analysis, 2 forensic experts determined that the bruises on Valin's body had been misinterpreted. They concluded that the marks could not be evidence of strangulation or sexual abuse, but simply post-mortem hematoma. Valin had no resistance to fight that sudden, natural death. According to Dr. Pollan's report, all the important findings that had confused people were unclear. There was not a shred of forensic evidence linking Bill to murder or sexual abuse. There was no semen on the body. There was no blood. There was no saliva. No biological matter of Billy's on Valin or the bed where she was found dead. Valin was not murdered, Bayliss asserted. In retrospect, when we looked at these forensics, there was no basis to conclude that she had been raped. It was a mistake. It was easy to say that, but these 5 leading forensic experts had a hard time proving it. In September 2005, armed with new medical findings, Bayliss went to court. The federal judge immediately ordered a retrial. After 12 years in federal prison, Bill Mullins-Johnson is free. In a sworn statement, Mullins-Johnson said he was convicted of a crime he did not admit to and never understood how he was convicted. He also promised not to violate the terms of his release. "I owe a great deal to Dr. Pollan in Toronto and Dr. Knight in Wales, neither of whom I have ever met. I will not let my mother, my uncle, or the court down." William Mullins-Johnson wept as he left the courthouse. "The past 12 years have been nothing but hell for me and my family. What I have been through has been a long illness. To be free again after all those years should be exhilarating. But that relief and happiness is bittersweet given the terrible ordeal he endured and persevered through. My best years are what I have lost. Your 20s are the years when you finish school, start your career, and find your place in life. If I had started a family, I would have had it all taken away from me during those years. I lost all of that. After 12 years, it was a quiet moment of apology. On behalf of the entire nation's justice system, they sincerely apologized to him in front of a large crowd. But the real apology that Bill and his family wanted to hear was from the people involved in sending him to prison. Not long after, Bill met face to face with one of them, Dr. Charles Smith. This man who had been so hasty in convicting Bill 12 years ago now took 42 seconds to apologize. He looked so pitiful with a trembling voice, his whole body and eyes not daring to look straight down at the auditorium, where Bill was sitting, choking up and unable to speak. Mr. Johnson, I do not expect your forgiveness, but I sincerely want to apologize to you, and I am very sorry for the mistakes I made with the hasty decision I made with you. I am so sorry. You ruined my life, ruined the relationship between my two brothers, my nephews and nieces. They hate me for what you did. I will never forget that. But to heal my wounds, I have to forgive you. Hearing Bill's response, the once confident doctor still could not turn around, just staring blankly into space. After 12 years of storms, Bill's entire family is rebuilding everything. But what happened will never be the same again. It is true that things that are lost are hard to find again. Everything will never be the same as before.
Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed the content. And as always, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next one.